If you've been scrolling through endless product pages, watching video after video of line array columns, and still feel like you're missing the piece that actually ties everything together, you're not alone. The decision feels bigger than picking a speaker. It's about committing to a sound system that will either lift a gig or leave the crowd asking for a mic check. I've spent the past couple of weeks talking to venue owners, listening to a few live sound engineers, and even pulling apart a couple of setup guides to see where the QSC KC12 BK really lands in the real world. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the KC12 isn't just another 12-inch box you slot onto a stand and hope for the best. It's a three-way column that's built to act as both a point source and a mini line array, which means it can be used as a main fill in a small club or stacked into a compact array for a mid-size house of worship. That flexibility is what most people are hunting for because it saves the headache of buying a separate fill and a separate array. The question is whether that flexibility actually translates into usable, reliable sound without forcing you into a compromise that you'll regret once the gig is over. Let's talk about who will actually benefit from the KC12. If you run a venue that sits in the 300 to 800 person range, you'll likely find the KC12 a solid match. It's heavy enough to deliver decent low-frequency extension for a room that size, yet light enough to be mounted on a standard 45-degree pole or a short stack. For a church that needs to cover both the front of house and a side chapel, the ability to point the columns in different directions without adding extra hardware is a huge time saver. Mobile DJ setups that travel to corporate events also love the quick change nature. You can break the columns down to a single row for a conference hall, then double stack them for a warehouse party. And the crossover points stay consistent because the three-way design handles the frequency split internally. On the flip side, if you're a touring musician who regularly fills arenas or outdoor festivals, the KC12 will feel cramped. The 12-inch driver can push enough bass for a club, but you'll start to notice a lack of deep thump when you try to cover a larger floor area. Likewise, a high-end installation that expects a true line array with long throw coverage will quickly outgrow the KC12's reach. In those cases, you'd be better off looking at a dedicated line array system that starts at a 15-inch driver and offers more extensive coverage angles. Now, let's get into the practical strengths that show up once you plug the thing in. The first thing most engineers notice is the clarity of the mid-range. Because QSC split the signal across three drivers high, mid, and low, the mids sit on a dedicated 12-inch driver that isn't fighting with the tweeter or the subwoofer. In a live band setting, that translates to guitars and vocals staying articulate even when the drums are cranked up. One venue manager I spoke with said they could finally hear the nuance of a folk singer's voice without turning down the drum overheads, something they'd been fighting with for years on a two-way system. Another practical win is the built-in processing. The KC12 includes a DSP that auto-optimizes the crossover and EQ for the three-way configuration, which means you spend less time dialing in filters and more time focusing on the mix. The DSP also provides a basic limiter, protecting the drivers from accidental overloads when someone slams the bass. For a small team that doesn't have a dedicated front-of-house engineer, that safety net can be the difference between a clean show and a blown speaker. The physical design also helps in ways you don't always think about until you're loading gear onto a van. The column's base is a rectangular chassis with integrated mounting points that accept both standard tripod stands and custom rigging. It's not a cheap-look plastic cage. The enclosure feels like it could survive a couple of bumps on the road, which is essential when you're loading and unloading gear in tight backstage corridors. The built-in handles also make it easy for two people to lift the column without a dolly, a small but real advantage when you're moving from a rehearsal space to a church sanctuary in the same day. No system is perfect, and the KC12 does have some trade-offs that become clear after a few nights of use. Because the system relies heavily on the internal DSP, you lose a degree of fine-tuning that a seasoned engineer might want. The DSP presets are solid for most scenarios, but if you're trying to carve out a very specific tonal shape, say, a vintage analog warmth for a retro-themed gig, you'll find the built-in EQ a little limiting. You can still insert external processing, but that adds another layer of complexity, and you're essentially bypassing one of the KC12 selling points. Another point worth noting is the